I'd like to welcome Dr. Mowgli Holmes up.
Hello. So, I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of a Portland biotechnology company called Cannabis Bioscience. And one thing that we've noticed in the last couple of years in this industry is that when we tell people that we're a biotech company that studies cannabis, they really don't have any idea what it is that we do. In fact, my own mom, a couple weeks ago, for like the third time, she was like, "What do you guys do exactly?" So I just want to try to clear that up a little bit. So the great introduction we just had, the whole talk, I think took away a lot of the work I have to do. So you'll understand now when I show you this slide. In every plant, there are cells, and in the nucleus of every cell, there's a lot of DNA. So the fact that we're a biotechnology company really just means that we're a team of geneticists and bioinformaticians who study DNA. And also, we like pot, so we study the DNA of cannabis. And that's all we do. And there's a lot of things that you can do with DNA. You can do genetic testing where you take samples in and you read the DNA and you can tell people what sex the plant is. We have a plant sex test that can identify males about a week after planting. And we have a genetic test that can tell you what strain you have. So this talk I'm going to give right now is about breeding and genetics in a general way. And then my collaborator, Rob Clark, is going to talk about breeding as well and taxonomy and the whole landscape of cannabis varieties. And right at the end, we're going to show you our work on the Cannabis Evolution Project, which is a huge map of all the strains that we have so far and how they're related. But first, we're going to talk about breeding. So the other thing you can do with genetic information is you can make tools that help breeders breed better. Because if you know, you guys know what I'm talking about now because you all just paid incredibly close attention to Dennis's talk. If you know what genes are in your plant, and you have a way to link those genes with the traits that they result in, then you can breed much, much faster, much, much more intelligently. You can stack traits together, and ultimately, you can do incredible things and make incredible plants. So I'm going to talk about that. The other thing that I have to get out of the way is that every time we tell people that we're a biotech company, immediately there's an elephant in the room right away. And we usually call that elephant, or we refer to that elephant as the company whose name will not be named. So at the end of this talk, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Monsanto does and why they suck, and a little bit about what we do, which is very, very different. But the main thing and the main difference is that, well, it's actually, there's a lot of differences, but the one I'm going to talk about right now is the difference between genetic engineering and breeding. So, again, I mean, not a lot of people understand this. My mom asked me this. One of the smartest people I know in Salem, a senator the other day, said, breeding is just genetic engineering, right? But it's not. I mean, it is, I guess you could say you're building things with genes, but it's GMO products are very different than the products of breeding. We've been breeding for 10,000 years. So I just want to go through really quickly what the difference is. So plants have lots of different traits. These are some beautiful carrots, obviously. And when you cross those traits, those plants together in the natural process of sexual reproduction, those traits get mixed up and you get children with different traits. And you can select those children and cross them with other plants and get different children. And that natural process, it's just sex and evolution, is how breeding works. It's just that humans are sort of guiding that process. So here's a little illustration of the difference. So if you take two plants that have different traits, in this example, there's a big purple carrot and a little orange carrot, and you let them breed together, you get children, and some of those children might have some of both traits. You might get a big orange carrot. When you make a GMO product, you take a plant, and then typically you take some other organism altogether, like a jellyfish, and you cut a piece of DNA out of the genome of the jellyfish. You just cut it right out, and you just insert that piece of DNA into the carrot. And then you get some horrific glowing carrot. This is a real thing. You can take green fluorescent protein from jellyfish and you can put it in anything and it will glow green. So that's what GMO products are. So I just want to go quickly over the history of what it's been like for humans to take plants and take the evolutionary process that they're already going through and accelerate it. So all organisms in the world are evolving, right? Every generation, they're a little different. And then the ones that do better survive. And so they're constantly changing. And sometimes they're getting better, or they're always getting different. Usually they're getting better adapted to whatever pressure is on them. And so when humans take them and they start controlling how they breed, it's like humans are like ratcheting that process forward and making it move faster and faster. It's just natural evolution, but now it's driven by what humans want. And I mean, you understand how this worked for THC, right? We had cannabis, we wanted more THC, and we got it. We just kept crossing the high THC ones. It's pretty simple. It's natural evolution, but it was humans deciding, okay, we want the THC. So 10,000 years ago, we started growing plants and paying attention to them. We would take wild varieties and we would save seeds, and we'd replant those seeds. And for thousands of years, we had land races, which were just the plant varieties that grew up in different regions where farmers were paying attention to them. They weren't doing breeding really, but every year they saved the seeds from the best plants. And you get these local populations that are really different from each other. And for cannabis, we had land races like this all over the globe. And some of them were just for fiber, some of them were for oil seed, and some of them were for, weird shamanic rituals. We had that all over the world, and they had specialized because this is what people in those regions wanted. And then only about 100 years ago, we started doing controlled crossing, where instead of just saving seeds all the time, you're actually picking the parents, making controlled crosses, picking the children, and now it's called classical breeding, but it's still a relatively new technique. And the way it would work with crops is that you would do the inbreeding, the back crossing process that you just learned about, and then you get a stabilized seed line. So in a way, cannabis hasn't even gotten to that point in general, since you can't buy a decent pack of seeds from Amsterdam yet. So this is just an illustration of what humans can do to a plant. The plant on the left is teosinte. It's a wild grass that could be found all across South America thousands of years ago. Humans got their hands on it, and they weren't doing controlled crosses, they were just saving seeds. Eventually they started doing controlled crosses. 3,000 years later, corn. So that's just natural evolution with humans messing with it. This is a little illustration of the size difference between teosinte and corn. There's a lot of other differences, but the size gives you an illustration of how much we can change a plant. Same thing with peaches, watermelons. That's how watermelons started, before we started messing with them. So we don't just drive plants from one thing to another either. We can also diversify them. So all of the greens that you buy in the grocery, cabbage and broccoli and Brussels sprouts. Those are all actually still the same species. They're all related to a wild mustard called Brassica oleracea, and they're all still considered brassica. They're just different cultivars of brassica. They can still interbreed. They're still biologically the same species. They've just been made very, very diverse because of human selection for different parts of the plant. And you all know that the same thing happened with cannabis. Not only did we drive it in one direction, we took it from this weedy, hemp-like originator to this outrageous high THC plant. But we also made it into thousands of different varieties. We made it so diverse. But it's all cannabis. So this is just a little graphic so you can understand how this has gone historically. So 10,000 years ago, humans domesticated plants. For millions of years before that, if we just look at just raw evolutionary change, just how different a plant is from its ancestors on the y-axis, evolution is always leading to some change. Things are changing constantly. But once domestication happens, it's not natural selection anymore, it's artificial selection. And it's artificial, it's still natural, but it's artificial in the sense that humans are fucking with everything now. So I guess that's a good definition of artificial. So the rate of evolution increases. And this first phase is called mass selection. And that's just farmers saving seeds and replanting them every year. That's how you get land races. And then about 100 years ago, we started to do the controlled crossing thing that I talked about. And the rate of change really accelerates. So during this time, from around 1900 to 1970 or 80, corn yields in the United States went up by something like 8-fold. Corn yields per acre, because we're doing this targeted breeding and we're picking the most high-yielding varieties every year and crossing them together. And then just very recently, a new technique has started to transform the agricultural industry in the entire world. It's called marker-assisted selection. And I'm going to explain what that is, but it has to do with the fact that now we know how genes work. But just about the same time that people started to figure out how genes work and how to use that information to guide breeding, they took what was really kind of a wrong turn for a little while. And they started doing genetic modification of plants, which is where you're just taking other genes and sticking them in there, and you're not really driving evolution anymore, you're just altering the plant by putting in a foreign gene. But at this point, marker-assisted breeding is actually starting to kind of win the day over genetic modification. It's a technique that leverages the best science we have to help traditional breeders do traditional breeding. It doesn't involve introducing foreign genes at all. And even big companies like Monsanto and Syngenta and Dow Agro are doing marker-assisted selection now. In the last few years, a bunch of commercial plant varieties have been released that were made with marker-assisted selection. This is just a little example of a few of them. And this is a little pamphlet that Greenpeace put out, just sort of touting the virtues of marker-assisted selection, because it really is a biotechnology for plant breeding that does not involve genetic engineering, but it has the potential to solve the world's hunger problems because it can create new plant varieties just as quickly and powerfully as genetic engineering can, but in a way that creates a whole, real plant that doesn't have foreign genes introduced into it. So here's what it is. For years, people just did classical breeding where they picked plants and they would cross them and then look at all the progeny and pick the ones they wanted. Here's how it worked. This is the old version. You take pollen from a male plant. This is an electron micrograph of one single grain of cannabis pollen. That's actually cannabis pollen right there. You collect some from the male that you want. You paint it on the female that you want, very carefully. The female makes seeds, collect the seeds, plant the seeds. And then you have to grow all the plants up to maturity. And then you have to smoke them and see how you like them. And then you pick the ones you like the best, and then you repeat, right? So that's classical breeding. This is how marker-assisted breeding works. It's pretty similar. You start with pollen, you make a cross, you collect the seeds, you plant the seedlings, but now you plant the seedlings a little differently, right? You do tens of thousands of seedlings under LED lights. This is actually an indoor basil farm, which is super cool. But this is how you grow seedlings when you're doing marker-assisted selection. And then you take the DNA out of all of those seedlings. You just take a tiny little snip out of every leaf. You take the DNA and you put it on one of these sequencers that have just recently been invented that can sequence a human genome in a couple days. And you read the DNA. And if you know what genes are associated with which traits, when you read the DNA, you know which of your seedlings have the traits you want. So you don't need to grow them up and smoke them. You will eventually get to grow them up and smoke them, but you don't have to do that every generation. Because you know which seedlings have powdery mildew resistance and which seedlings are going to be high THC or high yielders or smell like chocolate and oranges. You know that because you know what the genes are. And then you do the next cross. So it's the exact same process. You just have all of this information to guide you. And because you don't have to grow every generation up to maturity, you can do it 4 or 5 times faster. And you can take all the traits that you want and you can combine them into single plants and make amazing plants that are powdery mildew resistant and smell like chocolate and oranges and have crazy spikes of not just CBD, but CBDV and other interesting compounds and the terpenes that you want. You can combine all those traits together. So marker-assisted breeding is just classical breeding, but it's guided by all this data that we have now because of the genomic revolution. All right, so I'm going to switch gears here and talk about Monsanto again. So this is a crop circle that was made by Filipino farmers who were protesting against Monsanto. I think it's really pretty. I just want to explain for a second. You guys probably know this stuff, but I'm just going to say it anyway. So the reason why they suck is because the practices that they use lead us toward an agricultural industry that is a monoculture, where people are just growing single varieties of plants in massive scale. They don't care about diversity, they don't care about genetic diversity, they don't care about variety, and commercially that's not what's viable in their world. But we have a plant where there's maybe 10,000 different varieties, and the plant serves dozens of different needs. So we don't want monoculture. We probably don't want it with corn either, but that's what we have. They also obviously have a monopoly. They own all the seeds. So Monsanto and DuPont Pioneer together own 70% of all the soybean seeds in the world. I don't have to tell you why that's not good. They also, when they have that, they can charge crazy prices, and they can go into the third world and disrupt entire economies by constantly raising prices, because once everyone's using their seeds, everyone has to use their seeds for various reasons, and they can charge whatever they want. There's also a problem with their use of genetic engineering. There's a lot of problems with that, but one big problem with that they don't talk about much is that when you have plants with artificial genes introduced, those plants can get loose. Those genes can get loose and they can get into the wild and they can change entire ecosystems in ways that nobody understands at all. And the big problem about that is that there's no regulatory oversight. They have enough lobbying strength in Washington that they can do whatever they want, and they can get GMO plants approved really easily without anyone looking at ecosystem issues or health issues. They also make plants that are resistant to pesticides. So they can dump glyphosate on everything. They can dump it in your city parks, and now we know that glyphosate causes cancer. But they sell glyphosate-resistant plants that makes it possible to dump glyphosate or Roundup on everything. So the pesticide burden in the air and all around us is just constantly increasing because of the things that they do. And another drawback to that is that you get pesticide resistant. You get superbugs that nothing can beat. They also have a tendency to let their plants or their pollen blow into the fields of small farmers and then sue the hell out of those little farmers for growing their plants. That's not good. They also do all of their work based on very restrictive plant patents. So they engineer their plants, and then they patent their plants, and then they own their plants, and then no one else owns those plants. They can sue anyone they want. They can sue small farmers. They can sue anyone for owning plants like that, and you can't save the seed, you can't replant the seed, and it's just a model of agriculture that breaks with 10,000 years of history and basically allows large multinational corporations to do the work of agriculture. It does not allow small farmers to do it. So real quick, I want to talk about the plant patent thing a little bit more, because as you'll see in a little bit, we're sequencing thousands and thousands of cannabis strains. And we want all of those strains to be in the public domain. We're sequencing the existing strains. Those belong to everybody. So, and we've been collecting from all over the world. And one thing that we did not expect was the pushback that we would get from Northern California in particular, where we're collecting samples and we're sequencing them and we're going to tell people what strain they have. And we want to give all of our data to this group called the Open Cannabis Project that is going to use that data to show that these plants have been around forever and they're in the public domain and they belong to everybody. But all the farmers in Northern California who we thought would be on board with that, because they don't like Monsanto either, they keep telling us the same thing. They keep saying, no, we want to patent our plants. We're going to get our own patents on this stuff. And I think that's pretty misguided. And I'm just going to tell you why real quick. So patents are not good for little farmers who live out in the woods. They just don't serve you. It has never been that way. Patents are a tool that big corporations use to protect what they have and to be able to sue anyone they want to. They were originally conceived of as a way to help small inventors protect what they invented, but they don't work like that. They only protect corporations that have the deep pockets to initiate massive lawsuits. And they become a tool to stifle innovation rather than to protect it. They typically don't just restrict your right to make something and sell it, but they even restrict your private use of it, which doesn't make any sense for most industries. It definitely does not make sense for cannabis. They also encourage biopiracy, which is when a big corporation goes into some indigenous culture and takes a plant that they've been using for thousands of years and then patents it, because there was no proof that it was in the public domain, because no one knew about it because it was in Venezuela or Ethiopia. This has happened lots of times. Companies tried to patent different varieties of coffee. They tried to patent quinoa. And there's now an international treaty that blocks this kind of stuff, but there's nothing to stop Monsanto from coming into our community and taking sour diesel and renaming it and patenting it, because there's no proof that it's in the public domain. And so that's one of the problems with the way that plant patents work in general, is that they encourage that kind of stuff. And also, kind of my final point in my conversations with these guys in Humboldt and Mendocino is that you actually can't get patents on cannabis anyway, because patents are federal, and the federal government is not granting cannabis plant patents anyway. But they will start to grant them pretty soon. And there's still a lot of growers who really want to patent their stuff. Which, by the way, if you make something really new, you should be able to protect it. But if you have something that's been around, you've been selling it for years, that's not how patents work. Once you sell stuff, you can't patent it. It's out there. Everybody has it. It's in the public domain. Everybody owns it at that point. So once patents are available for cannabis, and they will be, we have a robust plant patent system in this country, and it will extend to cannabis when the federal laws change. But they will take many years and lots of money to get. They will protect corporations. They will encourage corporations to sue the hell out of little growers who are growing stuff. And they just won't work very well anyway, because patents just don't work well in industries that are turning over really, really fast, where everything is changing. So you can spend years and years and lots of money protecting, your cut of blue dream, but there's going to be a lot of other great cuts of blue dream in a couple of years. It's just not, it doesn't make sense in an industry like this where there's so much ferment. So this leaves a big question, right? I mean, cannabis breeders for years have produced this incredible variety that we're all making use of now and that we all love. I mean, cannabis would be so boring if it was just a few varieties. There's no other plant in the world that is so diverse. So we want breeders to be constantly making new, amazing stuff. And breeders have never really managed to get paid very well. So how do we support that? And our argument is that there are ways to support that without patents. So there are various different registration approaches that let you charge other people for licensing fees if they're selling your plant, but that don't restrict private use. So in the non-cannabis world, there's plant variety protection, which is like patents, but different in that it allows farmers to keep seed and replant it. It allows private, non-commercial use, but it forces big companies to give you licensing fees. There's also the model of the Creative Commons, which was invented for the internet, and it just creates all these legal structures that lets you create something and release it, but say, okay, if you're going to sell this, you have to pay me money, but if you're just going to use it for your high school book report or for your own purposes or whatever, you don't have to pay for that. And that's how we think cannabis should be. If you're a breeder and you make something new and amazing, and Tilray wants it and they want to sell it, they should pay you for that. But if medical patients who live in your state want to grow it in their backyard, they shouldn't have to pay for that. That's not commercial use. That should be free. Not everybody agrees with this, but this is what we think. And there are various community-based efforts going on to make something like this happen. And I encourage you all to go and look at the Open Cannabis Project, which is one sort of nascent approach to dealing with this stuff. I mean, right now the federal government, which spends a lot of effort looking after intellectual property issues in every other field, it's not paying attention to cannabis. So if we want to do something that stops corporations from having control, but supports small breeders, we're going to have to build some kind of community-based structure that does that. We're going to have to do it ourselves, because the feds aren't going to do it now. And then when they do it, they're not going to do it the way that we wish they would do it. So the last thought I want to leave you with is that we have this window right now before the feds are involved in this, where Monsanto's not involved, the FDA is not involved, Syngenta's not involved, Philip Morris is not involved, and we can do our own things. We can start our own companies. We don't have to compete with multinational corporations, and we can deal with state lawmakers. We don't have to deal with federal lawmakers, and it's a magic window. We probably have 3 years, maybe 4 years. So right now we can structure this world to look the way we want it to look, and this is all the time we have. In 3 or 4 years, we're done. Whatever we put in place right now is what's going to be there. And if it's strong enough and robust enough, when the feds come in, it will stick around. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob Clark, who's going to tell you actual real information about cannabis, because he wrote the book on cannabis. He wrote both, or all three of the books on cannabis. And then that one in particular, which is beautiful, by the way. It's a beautiful book. And then after Rob talks, I'm going to show you a totally separate thing, which is our map of all the strains that we have and how they're related. Right at the end, but I'll let Rob lead into it. Thank you. So I'm going to show you the clusterfuck. So remember what Rob was saying about backseed and hybrids? When people show evolutionary relationships between species, they make a tree. But if you want to show evolutionary relationships within one species, where everyone's hybridized, it becomes a kind of a terrible hairball. And especially with cannabis, imagine if you have a parent on one side of the genetic space and another parent on the other side, and you cross them, they're going to make a bunch of siblings that aren't the same but kind of spread out in between them. And then if you do that a lot, over and over and over, you get the actual population structure of cannabis. So this is close to 1,000 different cannabis varieties from all over the world. We collected them over 2 years. We've been collecting them from every single state in the United States, from Africa, India, Thailand, Afghanistan, Europe. We have hemp samples from the Vavilov Institute, though they're not on here yet. We have hundreds of land races. Most of these that we have on this beta version are the polyhybrid samples from United States dispensaries. Every dot is separated in space by its genetic distance. If you have one mutation that separates you from another strain, you're this far away, and if you have 2, you're this far away, and 3, you're this far away. And then the lines are inferences that we can draw based on how much shared chunks of genotype you have. We can infer first-degree relationships, which are either siblings or parent-child relationships. As we get tighter with this, we should be able to put arrows on them that go from the parents to the children. Right now, all we can tell is if you're a first-degree relationship. So the whole thing is a map of the cannabis population, and it's the true structure. I mean, this is the genetic sequence, and everything is laid out according to the genetic sequence. And obviously, it's ugly, right? I mean, what we think of as a strain, when we buy a strain from Holland, is actually just this spread of genotypes, and that spread creates all this noise across the middle. What was actually most striking to us is how much structure there still is. So this big cluster here, this is the OG Kush cluster. It is so tangled, but if you pull back and you look at the whole population and you turn it, you see this nice, pretty clear cluster where the OGs hang together. We're going to try to start doing strain certification for people, and once we do that, if you submit a strain, you'll be able to log in, and your strain will light up. You'll be able to see how it's related to other strains. You'll be able to see how far it is from other things. This cluster over here, is that the purple cluster? So one thing that's surprising, right, is you know how the different purple varieties have been crossed into lots of stuff? You see that purple hue in lots of different strains. But this purple cluster still forms this really nice genetic cluster. Can you zoom in on that a little bit? Here we come. Yes. No. We're still working. This isn't going to be public for a few months. This is our in-house beta version. We still have to figure out how to make it something that you just want to. I mean, it's actually face melting to just play with it. We play with it for hours. It's insane, but it's not really ready for public consumption. But so this whole cluster right now is the purples. All the purple Urkels, all the old purple Kushes, they're all still very closely related. And to us, that means that there's been a lot of back crossing. Because if you cross a purple with something on the other side of the space, you're going to get something in the middle. But it seems like the purples have been repeatedly back crossed, and so they're clustering nicely. Let's see that AC/DC cluster. Is that it? That's not it. AC/DC. So one thing that we noticed when we sequenced the AC/DCs and the cannatonics and the Charlotte's Webs is that they're all kind of the same. So Charlotte's Web, it's probably just Harlequin. It's probably just canatonic. I mean, more likely it's Harlequin, but they're all kind of the same. It's kind of a branding issue. So here, zoom in a little bit on that. They all cluster really nicely together. They're all, I mean, basically what you can see over and over is that people take cuts of things and they rename them. And so when you search for things like cookies or sour diesel, you get, actually in this case not sour diesel, but if you search for cookies, you get cookies all over the map, right? But then we have one nice tight cluster of cookies that we think is the real cookies. And you can start to figure out what's what based on the parentage. So for instance, it's like a crossword puzzle. So we have blueberry from DJ Short. And that's not in very much doubt, unlike most things, because nobody complains about the fact that everybody agrees that DJ made blueberry. And we have Super Silver Haze that we're pretty sure is the right one. So Blue Dream, everybody agrees. There's not many things that everybody agree on, but everybody agrees that Blue Dream is Super Silver Haze crossed with blueberry. And then there's Blue Dreams everywhere. But the Blue Dream that shows the parentage being Super Silver Haze and blueberry, that's the right Blue Dream. And then you can kind of work your way back, and then if they're Blue Dream crosses, you tie them to that one. So we have to figure out all this naming stuff because it's just been a mess. People just name their stuff whatever is selling, and so all of that is reflected on here right now. Is that the Blue Dream? Yeah. See, the screen's a little low res to see all the details. So when you click on one node here, it shoots out lines to show you what it's related to. And if this is ugly, it's partly because we haven't made it as beautiful as we can make it. But it's also really just because it's ugly. The cannabis population is an ugly clusterfuck now. And if you have a clone-only line, we can take that, we can tell you definitely it's genetically identical. But if you have some seed line that's not stabilized, and you give us one of those seeds, it's gonna be just lost in there in the noise. Maybe we'll be able to tell you who the parents are, but the idea that we have of a strain, there's no strain. There are clone-only lines. I heard about an inbred line once. I had never seen one really. Rob made one. I never saw one come from a company. But I know a guy who got a true breeding line from some company once. You've probably all heard of some guy who got one once, but. So it's just a mess. If you turn on all the names, it's like, psh. But that's the true structure of the population. And once we get it dialed in and we get the names cleaned up, and you bring a strain to us, we'll be able to sequence it and tell you this is what you really have. And you'll be able to take that information and look at the parents, see who you're related to, and use that to help your breeding, to push you forward. And ultimately, this will help us to make more crazy new plants. But what we hope is that it doesn't just make more mess. What we hope is that people start carving out space and making really unique things, making stuff over here where there is nothing, you know? Breeding new plants that are amazing and unique and coherent, that really put all the traits together that people want. We want to go back to land races and see what they're like, but we also want to go forward and make brand new stuff. And now that we have this map, I think it'll help us to do it.
This is literally like the coolest thing ever to me. We've been waiting to see this data for really 2 years, or as Mowgli would say it, 2 months. This data been 2 months away for the last 2 years. Yeah, I see. We went way over today. If you have questions, Dr. Holmes, Robert Clark will both be here. Dennis Todd is still here. A big thank you so much to all of you for coming out, sharing all your wonderful information with us. This was a really, really cool science pub. I'm just glowing over this. It's not just the pregnancy, it's how cool the information is.